an author of many books, but also above all a very good and dear friend. So we are very happy to welcome today Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed, who is a professor emeritus at Stockholm University. He has previously taught at Government College and LUMS in Lahore. He has been a professor of political science, but has worked not just in political science, but other fields, and has written seminal books, including the Garrison State, the idea of an Islamic state, and then his most celebrated work, the Punjab partition, on which we are going to have a talk today. He has also recently published and very recently available in Pakistan a masterpiece on Jinnah, his life successes and failures. So he's all round an academic who, even though he is now Professor Emeritus, hasn't really retired and will not retire, and keep on writing great books for us and engaging with us. He's an excellent speaker, so I encourage all of you to ask questions. He loves questions, he loves discussions. So please do make the most of this. He is zooming into us from his home in Solna in Stockholm. So make great use of it, make great use of this 1 hour and a half that you will have with him, and learn from him and really imbibe Temple Road in the Bulgaria, and his research on Lahore, which actually set a new standard on research in Lahore. So Professor Ishtiaq, we are very happy and grateful that you are with us today, and we really look forward to hearing from you during this talk, which is on the partition and Lahore.
So do I start or what?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Yaqub Bangash, for these very kind and generous remarks about me. Lahore is my home city. When people ask me who was your first love, I always have a problem because I think Lahore is a very strong candidate. And my faithfulness to Lahore has remained despite all the 48 years I've been away from it. When I was growing up in Lahore, it was still very much bearing the characteristics of a cosmopolitan city with um Anglo Indians, Goanis, not many Hindus, actually no Hindus and no Sikhs. So predominantly we were all Muslims and some Christian students at the St. Anthony's High School where I started my education. I was born on 57/112 Temple Road, Lahore, and some of the most horrific incidents of brute violence took place on that road. On the 12th of August 1947, my mother, by chance, in the morning was looking out of the window, which opened onto the Temple Road, and she noticed that to her right, which was the square, the local gundas had assembled. And this was a time when Lahore was burning, and she thought that there would be something nasty going to happen. And then she saw that from the left of her, as she looked out, a big burly Sikh came on a motorbike. And as he came close to this place, these gundas tried to attack him, but he pulled out a gun. And when he did that, they all dispersed. 20 minutes later, she saw once again from the left, sorry, an old Sikh carpenter on his old, dingy, broken bike with his food for the daily work that he was going to do. In Punjabi, we'll call it a potli when you have your food tied to the handle of your bicycle coming. When he reached just below our window, the gundas then attacked him and mercilessly killed him. And my mother died in 1990 in Stockholm. Until the last days, she was traumatized. She thought that that was a horrible thing to do to an old, poor man who was just going to his work, that India was going to be partitioned, that there will be two states and Lahore's character would change, didn't really bother to the hundreds and thousands of ordinary Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs who over the generations had lived in Lahore. Let me begin by saying that the Lahore that the British had uh, uh, formed was a cosmopolitan city. Here you would find people from many parts of the world, artists with their galleries. You would find clubs. You would find all the colleges, universities, medical colleges, which became famous in the world, engineering college, which later on became a university. Lahore was the hub of a modern, forward looking, progressive city. And in the 20th century, it had produced several generations of educated young men. Insofar as the politics of Lahore were concerned, from 1923 onwards, Punjab had an enviable case of communal harmony. Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs cooperating politically through the Punjab Unionist Party founded by Sir Fazle Hussain. Let me tell you, I'm especially addressing people in Lahore, that Sir Fazle Hussein's favors to the Muslims of Punjab and Lahore are immense. Because of his efforts, uh, seats for Muslims were reserved in Government College Lahore and in King Edward Medical College Lahore. There is no doubt that, as elsewhere in India, Muslims were behind Hindus everywhere, and let's say in the Punjab, also behind the Sikhs. The reason was that when the British brought in modern education, the Hindus were the first to take to it. Sir Sayyid's campaign had an impact on the Punjab, but that its impact was much later. So the Hindus and the Sikhs, urban Sikhs, had an advantage. That advantage had given them overrepresentation in the government services, in the colleges, universities. But Sir Fazle Hussain introduced reservations, and then from the late 1920s, if you look at the government college and King Edward Medical College's representation, you find Muslims increasing all the time. After Sir Fazle Hussain, who died in 1936, Sir Skandar Hayat took over. And Sir Skandar Hayat's favors to the Muslims was that he recruited a very large number of Muslims into the Punjab police. About 70 to 73% of the Punjab police was Muslim. If you look at the Badshai Mosque, it was in a dilapidated situation with all the four, turrets in a bad shape. It is Sir Skandar who restored them. The glory of Badshai Mosque Lahore has to be attributed to Sir Sikandar Hayat. So this was the Punjab Unionist Party. Up until the 1936-37 elections, the people in Punjab, the Muslims voted for the Punjab Unionist Party, and so did the Hindus, who had Sir Chotu Ram representing them. And the Sikhs cooperated with them through the Sikh Nationalist Party of Sir Sundar Majitia. So this was the situation of Lahore. Then comes another important point to underline: the importance of Lahore, the battle for Lahore. Remember, it was in December 1929 that the Indian National Congress decided to come all the way to Lahore to demand complete freedom from India and to establish a free, secular, multi ethnic, multinational India. But remember, it's also in Lahore that on the 23rd, 24th of March 1940, the All India Muslim League demanded the creation of Muslim states generically. Together, we can call them Pakistan. So I need not labor the point that Lahore was intrinsic to the future of the subcontinent. Now we move fast forward. 1945, there is an election in the UK. Churchill loses the election. We get a Labour Party, and the Labour Party calls elections in India to ascertain the wishes of the people. By that time, it was well known that the Indian National Congress wanted a united India with an effective center. The All India Muslim League, after the 1940 Lahore Resolution, wanted a partitioned India. And the Sikhs had already in 1923, 1 week after the Lahore Resolution, said that we are against the division of India on a religious basis. But if India is partitioned, we will have those part on a religious basis. Then we will have the Punjab partitioned on a similar basis, so that the non-Muslim majority districts of the Punjab, and there were 12 out of 29, that they are separated and given either to a Sikh state or to India. So these things had already been declared. Now come the elections, the 1945 election, and in my book, The Punjab Bloodied, Partitioned, and Cleansed. This is an Oxford University Press, Karachi publication. Several editions have come out. The 2017 is the latest, with many new stories added. In there, all the details of what happened transpired in the Punjab, in the battle for Lahore, I've given. So you have to look at the book for the details. Elections are held, and we get a classic political science problem. There were 175 seats for the Punjab Assembly, of which 86 were reserved for the Muslims. The Muslim League won 75 and 73. Two later on, its strength increased to 75. The Punjab Unionist Party, which has swept the elections in 1937, its strength was reduced to just 18, of which 2 left and joined the Muslim League. Why? What happened during this period? During this period, we get ample evidence, if you look at my Jinnah book, that whereas the Indian National Congress refused to support the British in the war effort, Mr. Jinnah, Quaid-e-Azam, supported the British, and out of it, he got many concessions. And that enabled him to make a breakthrough in the Punjab. So in the Punjab, the landlord class left the Punjab Unionist Party and joined the Muslim League because the Congress had declared that in an independent, free India, big Zimidari will be abolished and India will be reconstituted as a federation with an effective center based on the Soviet model socialist economy. Remember, that's the breakup point. That created, anxiety among the landlords of northwestern India, and they all flocked to the Muslim League, abandoning the Punjab Unionist Party. So in the 1945 election, the Muslim League had used openly communal slogans. Pakistan ka nara kya? La ilaha illallah. If you go to my book, you will find Sayyid Ahmad Said Kirmani, who was, I think, General Secretary of the Punjab Students Federation. His evidence of Aziz Mazhar, a Pakistani journalist who was, I think, one of the joint secretaries of the Muslim Student Federation. and my cousin Mia Baksood Ahmed. All of them were young people then, and they went around raising these slogans. Some other slogans were लेके रहेंगे पाकिस्तान जैसे लिया था हिंदुस्तान, that by force we took India once, now we'll take Pakistan. So these, and if you look at the reports of the Punjab governor, Sir Bertrand Clancy, every fortnight he explains how Islam is being used to mobilize Muslim opinion in favor of an Islamic state, and how hatred against Hindus and Sikhs was being preached. At the same time, the Communist Party of India had sent its Muslim cadres, amazingly, a Communist Party and Muslim cadres to join the Muslim League, saying that you add class based slogans. So the class based slogans were that the Hindu moneylender and the Sikh moneylender would no longer oppress you, and we will have a socialist Islamic Pakistan. Students from the Aligarh Muslim University came all the way, and they went around the whole of Punjab. And I've given incidents from Sheikhupura and many other places where they went and said, we know that in future Pakistan, Aligarh will not be a part of it. But for the glory of Islam, we are here. So mobilize Muslims to support the Pakistan demand. The election results then did not give the Muslim League the majority. You needed 88 seats out of 175. The Congress won 50, the Sikhs won 23, and about 10 seats, of which two were for the Christians and one for the Anglo Indians, and 10 for the scheduled castes. Scheduled castes are those castes who were categorized as different from the upper caste Hindus. So, in the politics of forming a coalition government, when the leader of the Muslim League, uh, Nawab Mamdot, was called by the governor, Sir Evan Jenkins, to come up with a list of ministers who would support him in parliament, he failed. And then Sir Khizr Hayat Tiwana, because Sir Skandar died in December 1942, the new leader of the Punjab Unionist Party was Khizr Hayat Tiwana. He, with his 16 members, 50 support by the uh, Indian National Congress, and 23 from the Sikhs, and then the scheduled castes, they supported, and a coalition government was formed. So now the problem was that the Muslim League had excited so much, whipped up so much expectation that there will be a Pakistan and it will be based on justice and so on, that the Punjab Muslims were not willing to accept it. That how could you have a government where the party with the majority, with most seats, not a majority, was not given the government? But according to parliamentary system, the coalition government was legally justified. Anyhow, in January 1947, now we enter our period. Direct action, the call to go out and agitate against the coalition government, was given by Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Already in end of July 1946, he had given direct action call. The result was the 16th August communal riots in Calcutta, which claimed about 10,000 lives. Then communal riots spread to Bihar, where about 5 to 7,000 lives were claimed, almost entirely of Muslims. In Calcutta, it was half. Then the communal riots spread to Noakhali in eastern Bengal, where anywhere from 500 to 1,000 or so Hindus were killed. In Mumbai, there were communal riots. Then in Garh Mukhtasar in UP, there were communal riots, but based on, I think, cow, the Muslims slaughtered cow and the Hindu Jats were against it. So, but it took place at that time. Then finally in December 1946, those riots came to Hazara district of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, where many hundred Hindus and Sikhs were killed. and thousands fled to Rawalpindi, which was the first city of the United Punjab. Direct action, then we come to direct action. The direct action begins on the 24th of January 1947. The call is by the Muslim League to remain peaceful but agitate, refuse to accept the government of Khizr and his coalition partners. This was the call given. Sir Khizr Tiwana, who was the chief minister, he then ordered that the police raid the offices of the Muslim League and of the RSS, which was the Hindu militant organization, not the Congress, because Congress had been in jail from August 1942 till June 1945. So in the Punjab, they were hardly able to take any, organize them very well. Even then, they got 50 seats. Anyhow, and the Sikhs, they had their Akali Fauj. The raids were carried out, and many Muslim League leaders were arrested from their head office, which was in Lakshmi Chowk, Lahore, I think, in the Royal Park. Among them, Nawab Mamdod, Sardar Shaukat Hayat, Sayyid Amir Hussain Shah, Begum Shah Nawaz, they were arrested. As soon as they were arrested, there were mass agitations starting. And the police would then arrest people who would break the law, and they were taken to jail. So, over the weeks, all over Punjab, the Muslims voluntarily came, broke the law, Section 144, and they landed up in detention. Although I have given evidence that when Raja Ghazanfar Ali Khan, who was a member of the interim government at Delhi, when he came to Lahore and went to Lahore jail, he thought that the atmosphere inside was that of a picnic. The Muslims were sitting and singing, and somebody was playing the matka. Haji, they were enjoying their, because the Muslim League, may I tell you, never even for a second had ever agitated against British rule. The only people who went to jail were the Indian National Congress, members of the Communist Party of India, the Sikhs, but never the Muslim League. So for them, being arrested and then being treated so well was like a picnic, friends getting together. All this is documented. And let me also tell you, I must pay my tribute to Dr. Ali Raza of LUMS, who with great devotion worked on the hundreds of videotapes, no, audio tapes. This is 2000, 2003, 4, and earlier tapes, when we didn't have the latest technology. They were recorded on small cassettes. All of them are uploaded on the LUMS archives on partition. And many of the interviews which I did for what happened in Lahore, you can go and hear them. So all what I claim in the book can be verified largely because of the hundreds of tapes. About 5 to 10% were lost over the years, but all of them are there, so you can check them. Now, the agitation begins, and as the time passes, the Muslim League begins to harass the Hindus and Sikhs. I give evidence of that. On the 24th of February 1947 in Amritsar, a Muslim League, procession cornered an off-duty Sikh constable and clubbed him to death. 24th of February 1947 is the same day when I was born in Lahore, and I've always wondered. My parents were probably happy to receive me, but here some mother, some family lost a young man who had nothing to do with this. But this was mob action taking place, and you can't blame like that who did what. But out of it, then the Sikh leader said that the direct action of the Muslim League was no longer political, it was communal. They were attacking Hindus and Muslims increasingly. On the 26th of February 1947, there is an agreement between Sir Khizr Tiwana and the Punjab Muslim League, and the agreement is that the agitation will end and all those arrested will be released. But when this happened, 6 days earlier, on the 20th of February 1947, the British government had announced that that by June 1948 we will transfer power to Indians in a united or divided India. So Sir Khizr Tiwana, although an agreement was reached, by that time very nasty slogans had been raised in this 1 month and several days. Khizr kutta hai hai, खिजर कुत्ता अपनी मां नाल सुता, खिजर दल्ला हाय हाय, चलो भी चलो एक चीज मिलेगी, क्या भाई क्या, खिजर की बेटी, वाह भाई वाह. This is how the Muslim League campaigned from 24th of January to the 26th of February. Sir Khizr Tiwana was a feudal lord, one of the biggest, but he was also a gentleman. He realized that with the election having been won by the Congress and the Muslim League on the national level, the Punjab Unionist Party's role was over. So on the 2nd of March, he resigned. That created a crisis. Who would rule now in Punjab? The Punjab governor invited Mamdot, the Muslim League leader, to come up with a list of stable ministry which could take over, and Sir Nawab Mamdot failed. On the 3rd, from the Punjab Assembly, it still stands there, the Punjab Assembly is the same. The Sikh leader, Master Tara Singh, came out and he shouted, Pakistan Murdabad, we will never let Pakistan come into being. Some people say that he even pulled out his kirpan, which is a small sword. The Sikhs now deny it, but I've spoken to people who say they saw it. So anyhow, both evidences are there. From the newspapers, I have also given that evidence. The same evening, in Purani Anarkali, there is a Kudi Bazaar, no longer there. But those who know Lahore would know there was a meeting of the Hindu and Sikh leaders where they went out of the way in saying that we will never let the Muslim League form a government in the Punjab. Why? Because they had not allowed the coalition government of Khizr, Congress, and the Sikhs remain in power. It was simple as that. Some people say that already on the evening of the 3rd, communal riots started, but definitely from the 4th. On the 4th of March, the students of VAD College, which is now Islamia College Civil Lines, it's just on the opposite side of Government College Lahore on Kacheri Road. People who are familiar with Lahore know that. There is the Civil Lines police station. Bhagat Singh shot dead, what was his name? The policeman, two policemen, and later on, that's another case. Let me not go away from the main position. Anyhow, the Hindu and Sikh students came to what is now known as Nasser Bagh. It was then called Gol Bagh, Haji, in front of Gordon College. The principal of government college, Patras Bukhari, the famous Urdu writer, he called the police to establish law and order. And may I tell you, from the 24th of January to the 26th of February, the police never fired on the agitations. But already on the 4th of March, now the police fired on the students and several Hindus and Sikhs were killed. By the evening, Lahore was now a situation where there was a breakdown of law and order all the time. Stabbings were taking place. Hindus were being attacked where they were in a minority. Muslims where they were in a minority. And so on. A ding-dong battle was going on for about 2 weeks. I am not bringing in the other cities and the connections. We'll just continue to Lahore. At that time, Lahore had about 60% Muslim majority, and Hindus and Sikhs together formed 40%. These 40% were very prominent because modern Lahore was largely the success story of Hindus. Krishan Nagar and Model Town, all these were upscale Hindu localities because the Hindus were more advanced. The trade in Punjab, in Lahore, the banks in Lahore, all were in the Hindu Sikh ownership. And the Muslims of Lahore and Punjab were under heavy debt to Hindu moneylenders. So there was this problem as well, plus the call to create an Islamic state. Anyhow, by mid March, law and order had been established. On the 6th of April, the Hindus of the inner city, walled city of Lahore, issued a statement which I've quoted saying that we live as a minority in this part of Lahore, and our Muslim neighbors have taken very good care of us, and we plead to Hindus and Sikhs that wherever Muslims are in a minority, they take care of them as well. So the story is not like all Muslims attacking Hindus and Sikhs and all Hindus and Sikhs attacking Muslims. That's not the story. There is a gradual a loss of authority of the state. From a stable state, we go towards the Hobbesian state of nature, where everybody then is forced to attack the other side first in order to survive. For a while, there was a lull, a respite in Lahore. Then, in April, there were riots in Amritsar, and in May 1947, there is a resurgence of attacks in Lahore on Hindus and Sikhs. What is the secret about that? The secret is that in Amritsar, the Muslim Gundas and the Hindu Sikh Gundas were fighting one another. And the Muslim Gundas sent a packet of bangles, chudiyan, and henna, mendi, to the Gundas of Lahore, Muslims, saying that we are here fighting the Hindus and Sikhs successfully, driving them away, while you are in the majority and you are doing nothing. This is not hearsay. When I was growing up in on Temple Road, this story I heard all the time. But then I found a news item on this published in the Tribune that the Deputy Commissioner of Lahore, Mr. Eustace, he gave a press conference saying that we have discovered this package sent by the Gundas of Amritsar to the Gundas of Lahore, Muslim Gundas of Lahore, taunting them, why are they not attacking the Hindus and Sikhs? And then I even traced the daughter of Mr. Eustace, who lives in Dorset, I think, in England. And we talked, and she confirmed that this, her father used to talk about this. So this is confirmed. So there's a resurgence. This time they attacked some of the finest Hindus and Sikhs of Lahore, the family of Sir Gangaram, who there is no other person who has done greater favors to the people of Lahore and the people of Punjab than Sir Gangaram, with all the colleges, the hospitals, the modern farming, and so on. People who know Sir Gangaram would know his favors. Also were attacked was the founder of Dayal Singh College and Dayal Singh Library, the descendants of Dayal Singh Majithia. They had to run barefooted from Lahore. These people left already in May. By May, it was clear that Lahore was dominated by the Muslims. The Hindus were the losing, Hindus and Sikhs were losing the battle. The next stage then in Lahore is setting Shahalmi on fire. People who know Lahore, the walled city, would know that there are 12 gates. Mochi Gate was Muslim majority. Lahori Gate was mixed. But Shalmi Gate was predominantly Hindu and Sikh with some Muslims. On the night of 21st, 22nd June, the magistrate Muhammad Ghani Chiba organized the local gundas, Billah Jat, and others to conspire to set Shahalmi on fire. I have later traced Haji Abdurrahman Gil, the son of Billah Jat, who Billah Jat deputed then to go and do this. The whole details how they brought this lotion, they called it, which if once you set fire, the fire is very difficult to extinguish. So on the night of 21st, 22nd June, Shahalmi was set on fire and hundreds died, maybe more. The screams which were heard all over Lahore haunt people even today. By, by morning, then thousands of Hindus and Sikhs were leaving Lahore. They knew that the battle was lost. So during this battle now, we then come to July. On the 22nd or 23rd of July, Lord Mountbatten, the last Viceroy of India, comes to Lahore and he gives a press conference saying, yes, let me speak of one more thing. On the 3rd of June 1947, Mountbatten, after having talked to all the leaders, came to the conclusion that the Muslim League wants Pakistan, the Congress wants the whole of India under an effective government. The only thing is to partition India. So on the 3rd of June, the partition plan was announced. According to the partition plan, the provinces of Punjab and Bengal, which were Muslim majority, would be split into two blocks. The Punjab, for example, with its 29 districts, 12 districts which were Hindu Sikh majority would be one block, and 17 districts which were Muslim majority would be another block. Same with Bengal. They would then vote on whether they wanted to keep Punjab united or to have it divided. Now, let me tell you that in the Muslims of Punjab, including Sir Khizr Tiwana and the rest, they all voted for keeping the Punjab united. But the Hindu and Sikh legislators, they voted for the Punjab to be partitioned. Now the logic is like this. Mr. Jinnah wanted India to be partitioned on the basis of religion, claiming that in those areas where Muslims were in a majority, be separated and given to Pakistan. This logic was then used by the Sikhs, and on the 8th of March 1947, the Congress supported the Sikh demand for the partition of Punjab. Then come the riots. We talked about Lahore, but the greatest riots were in Rawalpindi, where 5, 6, 7,000 Sikhs were killed. So Punjab was in a terrible state by that time. Until July 1947, the Muslims of East Punjab were not attacked. But after that, they were attacked in a far better organized manner, with the Maharaja of Patiala and many other Sikh states sending their armed forces secretly to take part in the attacks. Then in July, Mountbatten comes 23rd, I think, and announces that I am advising that the offices of East Punjab move to Shimla. That was another signal after Shahalmi that Lahore is going to go to Pakistan. The Battle of Lahore, the Hindus and Sikhs understood was being lost. But some still stayed on, saying that in the past we have been ruled by Muslims. Once all this criminal activity is over, violence is over, law and order has been established, we will be able to stay on, because they had so much stakes in Lahore. But then the decision to demarcate the boundaries of Pakistan and India were given to the Boundary Commission, of which Cyril Radcliffe came as chairman. The Punjab Boundary Commission met in Lahore, the Bengal in Calcutta for 10 days. 21st July to 21st July to 31st July. Yes. In the arguments presented to the Punjab Boundary Commission, they are given in detail in my Punjab book and in the Jinnah book. The Muslim League demanded that, yeah, there were two factors on which Punjab would be partitioned. Areas would be demarcated. One was contiguous Muslim majority areas to be separated from non-Muslim majority areas, and other factors to be taken into account. The council, the lawyers for the Congress said that just majority was not enough. You had to look at the services to Lahore, and they claimed that 80% of the wealth of Lahore, educational institutions, hospitals, were produced by the Hindus. The Sikhs claimed that Guru Arjan Singh was born in Lahore. Maharaja Ranjit Singh ruled from Lahore. And in Lahore district, they owned most land and together Hindus and Sikhs paid most revenue. Therefore, Lahore should be given to either India or to a Sikh state. The Sikh state had been removed, so to India. Okay. The Muslim League claimed that other factors were a special case. Lahore, being a Muslim majority district, must come as a whole to Pakistan. When the Ratcliffe Award was announced on the 17th of August, of course, Lahore was placed in Pakistan. Then those several thousand Hindus and Sikhs in Lahore were mercilessly attacked. I give you one example and then I will finish. Professor Brij Narayan was a famous economist of the Punjab University. For some reason, he supported the demand for Pakistan. And he said that Pakistan was economically, financially feasible. But when the attacks took place, he lived on Nicholson Road, Lahore. It's the road going all the way to the Lahore railway station. People who are familiar with Lahore would know. The Muslim mobs were attacking Hindus and Sikhs everywhere now. The Hindus were running away. Sikhs were running away. So they came to Nicholson Road. And Professor Brij Narayan went up and said, look, young people, this is Pakistan's property. Don't burn it. It will be left for Pakistan. One of them recognized him because he was his student at Punjab University. So Professor Narayan was left without being harmed. Half an hour later, another mob came and he pleaded the same, but they killed him mercilessly. There is a writer, Urdu writer, Fikr Tonswi, a Hindu, but from Tonsa. He writes that day, whosoever Hindus and Sikhs were hoping to stay in Lahore realized they can't. And that is when they crossed. And by 1947 December, Lahore had become a Muslim city in which hundreds and thousands of Muslims from East Punjab had come, attacked by Hindus and Sikhs on the other side. So the character of Lahore, its demography, its cultural pluralism, its progressive modern outlook, all were transformed by this huge cataclysmic change which took place as a part of the partition of India, Bengal, and Punjab. I think I will stop here now and invite questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ishtiaq. Well, I am Dr. Yaqub Khan Bangash's RA since he had to leave, so I am in charge now. Let's wait for the questions from students, but before they ask any question, let me say that I have never come across any discussion about Lahore that is uninteresting. It is always full of good narrations and very interesting historical events that one wants to listen to and actually think about it. Well, since I am not from Lahore, I'm from South Punjab in Pakistan, I would like to ask a question which might come from a person who is not from Lahore. And the question is, how different is Lahore socially and culturally, today's Lahore, from the Lahore of British times, or if I may say, Mughal times? Uh, what would you say that the diversity that was there, is it preserved, or how do we see it right now?
I don't think after my lecture there is any justification for this question, but let me repeat what I've said. I've said that Lahore was always a pluralist city. I don't didn't go back to Akbar and even further in time, but Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs, and Christians, and Jews, and Buddhists, and Parsis, they all had settled in Lahore, and especially so after the British took over Punjab in March 1849. Even during the time of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, when for about 40 years there was a Sikh kingdom of Lahore, the three communities were represented in the state, in the military services. The character of Lahore had always been to accommodate, and there was during the British time, as I told you, there were many I should have gone into these details. Many Bengalis had settled in Lahore they came to teach in Punjab. Government College Lahore, if you go behind the, at the backside of the government college, there is a Mukherjee Road. He was the principal of Government College Lahore. Some of the famous actresses, writers, you talk about them: Krishan Chandra, Rajendra Singh Bedi, not so much Manto, he was in Amritsar, but later on he came and settled here. Uh, Mirza Adib, anybody you name, he was here. The best professors in the subcontinent, some of them were here. Like at FC College Lahore, you had this expert on Islam in modern India. I keep forgetting his name now because so FC College was a very vibrant college where the progressive leftist students were found. Government College was the stronghold of the pro-elite type of students. Islamia College was a stronghold of the Muslims. DAV College of the Hindus. The Sikhs had a Sikh National College. Punjab, Lahore was multicultural in the best senses of the word. There was Ram Leela, where Muslims, good-looking Muslim boys would dress up like Sita or sometimes as Ram. I've given those stories as well. And then during Muharram, Hindus would stand in line and feed water to the Matmis, and so did the Sikhs. All this is too well known. Sayyid Babar Ali recently admitted this, that when the Matmis, he's himself, I think, a Shia, he admits that he saw with his own eyes that when the Muharram procession, the Hindus were the first one barefooted who served water, and so did the Sikhs. At Eid and all, people were meeting one another. At the same time, Lahore was also the stronghold of political forces and religious revivalist forces. The Arya Samaj, then there was Sikh Sabha, there was the Ahle Hadith, both in Amritsar and in Lahore. So Muslim revivalist, Hindu revivalist, Sikh revivalist, claiming a pure Hindu, pure Sikh, pure Muslim identity, were also active. Politically, the Punjab Unionist Party provided the background for all to live together in peace. But when Muslim League started with its call to divide India on a religious basis, thereafter I've given you the polarization. And if you are from outside Lahore, have you not noticed that almost no Hindu, Sikh is to be seen in Lahore, and the few Christians who are there also have to be identified. But when I was growing up in Lahore, Gadi Shaho and the areas in Moghalpura and all, these were all Christian majority areas because they worked in the Northwestern Railways. At school at St. Anthony's, we had our teachers who were Anglo-Indians and Bengalis in skirts and so on. Lahore was beautiful before partition. I'm born after the partition, but I grew up hearing all these stories. So the Lahore of now is one where even the Muslims can't manage it. You have had terrorism taking place in Sunni mosques, Shia bargas, Imam bargas. Christian churches have been raised to the earth. There are hardly any Hindus to attack in Lahore. So that's all. So I mean, it is a world of a difference. I use the word transformation. So I don't know why you asked this question. That's very clear.
Well,
Today's Lahore is monolithic only in an appearance, but because the Muslims are as divided as can be Hindus on caste or anyone else. Today, Lahore is an intolerant city largely. Look at what the Labbaik Tariq has done in Islamabad, and then in Lahore. Lahore has become the stronghold of mob power. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Well, Shujat had a question for you.
Thank you very much for the amazing talk, Professor Ishtiaq. My question is, I think it's an often asked one, but as an amateur student of history, I would still like to know, or your comments on this. So also in the book you have mentioned this, that the religious nationalism was one of the reasons behind what happened in Punjab or in Lahore. But there are other people who would comment that there was a strong or an immense role of the British policies or the policies of the colonizers. So in your views, if an amateur student of history like me asks you that, to comment on what was more significant, the religious nationalisms of the Muslims or the previous policies of the British, which was a cause of the incitement in Lahore or in Punjab for that matter?
I think the question, the way you have posed it, let me try to structure it. The British united India, and in uniting India, they created the railway system, the road system, the bridges, the telegraph system, the system of newspapers. And the British did not do it with the intention of leaving India. In my Jinnah book, I mentioned Lord Wavell, the second last viceroy, saying that when he came to take over from Lord Linlithgow, Linlithgow told him that we are here for another 30 years, which means 1973. By that time, I would have done my MA and would be a grown-up, okay? So the British were not doing all this to abandon India. In abandoning India, then they had a choice, either to leave it as the Congress wanted, as a united India with a strong center, a federation with a strong center, or divide it as Jinnah wanted on the basis of religion. They chose to do it in their own way. They gave Jinnah a Pakistan, but not the way he wanted, the whole of Punjab and Bengal. Those were partitioned and given to India. So the Congress demand was not met full. The Muslim League demand was granted, but not in full. And why did they do it? If you have read my book, Pakistan, the Garrison State, I clearly mentioned that British military had come to the conclusion that the Soviet Union would be a big threat to South Asia with its poverty and caste oppression and so on. And I've quoted Sir Francis Tucker, head of the Eastern Command. There were 4 commands: Northern, Eastern, Southern, and I think Western, saying that we need an arch beginning from Algeria into Arabia Deserta, Turkey, Persia, and into northern Hindustan, where a Muslim state armed with Islamic ideology should be created. The British believed that because of Islam and this circle of Muslim states, they could be organized by the West to prevent the Soviet Union from coming to South Asia. So the British decision to partition India and the decision thereafter what area to go where, that I've shown in great detail. And if you have read my book, there should be no scope for any confusion. Either you ask a question pertaining to what I've said there, but in a general way, the British did all this with no intention of leaving India. The Second World War rendered it impossible for them to hold on to India. So when they left it on their own terms. That's it.
Maheen, you can ask your question now.
Okay, so sir, my question was that would you say that the documentaries that are made on either Gandhi and Jinnah are at par with the history of the subcontinent? Or do you feel like some creative liberty has been taken when creating those documentaries?
Well, documentaries, I've seen most of them, but not all, do have their own slant. And I would call into question many of them. But then this is the freedom of expression, and the one who has made them is responsible and answerable for the way he has interpreted these personalities. An entirely objective documentary should be based on my work, but then people would say that this is your perspective. So I would say all works can be questioned from some angle. But I claim that my work on Jinnah, which also looks at Gandhi and then partition and the garrison state, take a very different perspective because I'm a political scientist. When I examine history, I do it with the vantage point of political theory, knowing very well what is a state, what happens when state authority wanes, when law and order is not there, the Hobbesian state comes into being. I've even argued that once the partition took place and East and West Punjab came into being, a third situation came into being, the partisan state. In West Punjab, Pakistani Punjab, all those in power and the police, they all collided to throw out all Hindus and Sikhs or to kill them. And in East Punjab, the government in power and all political actors, they forced the Muslims to flee. Let me tell you, in the overall partition of India, somewhere about 1 million people were killed. And 14 to 15 million people for the whole of India moved home from one part to the other part. But look at the share of the Punjab. The population at that time, the population of India was 400 million nearly. Look at the Punjab. The population of Punjab for British Punjab was 28 million. If you include the princely states, it becomes 33 million. Of these, I have argued anywhere around 800,000 were killed. So 80% of the fatalities, deaths in the overall partition deaths were in Punjab. 10 million people, Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs, had to run across to save their lives, which means 30% of the population of Punjab moved house. And what is more characteristic of the Punjab is that it resulted in the first case of ethnic cleansing after World War II. So all that has to be brought forth. Who's going to make a documentary where everybody is exposed? I've also, we don't have the time. There are glorious, magnificent examples of Hindus helping Muslims and Sikhs, Muslims doing it to Hindus and Sikhs to Muslims. I can give you so many examples if you like. So it was not like all Muslims went after Hindus and Sikhs and vice versa. Not at all. After all, 10 million safely crossed the border and only 8 lakh were killed. A huge number, no doubt. But still, compare it with the 10 million who safely crossed the border. Had everybody joined hands and attacked, well, the result would be different.
Thank you very much, sir. Sir, there is another question from our student named Ghulam Mustafa. He says,
Yes, please go ahead.
He says, despite political hostility between India and Pakistan, creeping religious extremism, and a degree of lawlessness, Lahore still prides itself on its tolerance. On the border, Muslims, Hindus, and Sikhs congregate for festivals. So, is it true to say that the partition laid the foundation of hatredism and religious tolerance, intolerance? I mean, I think he wants to say in terms of past riots.
Let's ask some questions which do not follow from what I'm saying. For me, the partition is demonization, dehumanization of the other. This is what the Muslim League did, calling all Hindus and Sikhs evil. The Congress was in no position to attack, but the Sikhs did. The Sikh Panthak party said, we will never let the Muslim League come into power. And they demonized the Muslims as well. But give me one example of the Congress doing it. No. The Congress was the only true freedom party which struggled for the freedom of India. And the Sikhs definitely for the revolutionary movements. Mr. Jinnah, I quote in my Jinnah book as well as in the Garrison and Partition book, saying to Mountbatten, the Muslims of India have never opposed British rule. How come you will not allow us to join the Commonwealth? Jinnah was more keen to join the Commonwealth than anyone else. Jinnah himself says this. Jinnah himself says about Lord Linlithgow that until Second World War, the British were only referring to Mr. Gandhi, but now after the Second World War, then they are laying the red carpet for me. So Jinnah helped them keep the Congress at bay. Had the Muslim League and Congress joined hands, India would be free. But that's not what Jinnah wanted. He wanted Pakistan. And let's grant him that he's remained steadfast. The Congress made many attempts to assuage him, to convince him that we can arrange some sort of power sharing, but he refused. It's a total lie that Jinnah wanted power sharing within a united India. Please read my Jinnah book. I have left nothing to doubt. This is Pakistan. And Lahore is no longer, yes, if there is a cricket match in 2004 and all the Hindus and Sikhs, I am witness to the cricket match of 1955, Lahore. And I remember even, this was January 1955, the Pakistani High Commissioner, Sir Raja Ghazarfar Ali, allowed the Hindus and Sikhs of Amritsar to come to Lahore to attend the cricket match. You know, I was 8 years old then. Those Hindus and Sikhs, some went to the match. Most of them went to their old localities, and I found Muslims with flowing beards and Hindus and Sikhs embracing and crying one another because they had studied together, played together, and many of them had helped them during those months. Nobody talks about them. That was a beautiful Lahore revived in 1955 for those 5 days. Everywhere Hindus and Sikhs went and they were said, "Bhan ji, Pra ji, tusi te apne ghar aa gaye ho." They even do it now when they come to Anarkali, Hindus and Sikhs. The common Pakistani doesn't hate Hindus and Sikhs. He watches Bollywood movies and he enjoys as much as you and I do. Let's not vulgarize the common people. The hatred is a doing of our national curriculum. And now, of course, on the other side, the BJP has learned the lessons and they are doing the same. That's the big tragedy.
Yes. Sir, Wassam has a question. Can you unmute yourself and ask Wassam, please?
Thank you, Professor, for the wonderful talk. My question is, what were the views of Muslim which are not involved in mobs or riots, which had some humanity about Muslim League or Jinnah's vision of partition on the basis of religion?
Well, I mean, there was the Majlis-e-Ahrar and the Khaksars. These were two political parties. One Khaksar leader, unfortunately, was a babe, got involved in the killing of Sikhs. There is a, on Temple Road. And I know that man because he was a naan bhai. He used to make naans, but he was actually a police scout known as Mujahid Tajdeen. Mujahid Tajdeen, through the police, organized the attack on the Chemi Badshai, which is on Temple Road, and killed all the Sikhs who were inside. But in his confession, he said that now he prays to God for forgiveness, because in 1968, when he went to Delhi to attend the Urs of Hazrat Khwaja Nazmuddin, at the Wagah airport, the Hindus and Sikhs gave them one apple and two oranges. And then in Delhi, while he was going around, a Hindu from Anarkali recognized him and said, "Master, if you need any help, tell me, I will help you." I am giving the name of a man who took part in the murder, and his confession is there. There are many people who were good Muslims who were against this whole idea of partition. There were many in Lahore who never took part in this. For example, there is a Mr. One of the Model Town. I met him in 1990 in Delhi, and he said, our next door neighbor family was some Sayyid Muslims, and they came and said, we have news that you are going to be attacked, so please leave in time. So good Muslims who were neighbors helped one another, and there were many, I tell you. Even poor people helped one another. But this is, when the state doesn't have its authority, nobody knows what the future will be like. That is the golden time for all gangsters, for all criminals to go out, plunder, loot, and they took women away also, murdered people. Then the Muslims of East Punjab on the other side had to pay a very heavy price. But let me put it on record. For several months, it was the Muslims of the Muslim majority districts who attacked Hindus and Sikhs. From July, things changed in East Punjab. That's also on record. And my book has been given 2 best non-fiction book awards in Pakistan. So somewhere in Pakistan, you have very decent people. The members of the juries I've never met except one by chance at a dinner. Asghar Nadeem Sayyed, the famous writer. I met him at a party. He said, बड़ी खुशी हुई तुहाडे नाल मिल के मैं तुहाडी किताब देखी ते फिर मैं पूछया बंदा केड़ा है, because I have lived all my life in Sweden. So I thought that was a great compliment. ये देखे लोकां दे दिलां दे विच एक इंसान हमेशा जिंदा रहिंदा है. Let me give you another example. When Mr. Vajpayee came to Pakistan, somebody out of mischief issued a statement in one of the newspapers that those Muslims from East Punjab who want to go and visit their ancestral homes apply for a visa. Thousands of people did. And I've met many who said, कि सर तुसी सानू पुछदे हो साडे नाल की होया, असी ते जांदे होए अपनी अम्मा जी दे उत्थे फातिहा भी नहीं कह सके, एक दफा सानू ईस्ट पंजाब जान दो. इसी तरह मैंने इतने हिंदू और सिख, बल्कि जब मैं दिल्ली जाता हूँ तो दिल्ली में वो है इंडिया इंटरनेशनल सेंटर वेयर आई स्टे. वो जा रहे लाहौर दे पंजाबी आके मेरे हाथ फाड़ लैन, ओ यार तू आ गए हैं ते असी ते फिर जवान हो गए हैं. Now all of them are gone. वो एक होंदा सी उत्थे Lahore corner, all of them are dead and gone. But their stories are in my book. They live forever. As long as my books are there and people like you are interested, the story of Lahore and of Punjab will never be erased.
Thank you very much, sir. Fariduddin is of our student
Haji,
who
please
wants
go
to
ahead.
ask a question. Yes, Farid, can you please unmute yourself?
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for the talk. It was an eye-opening talk for me. I just wanted to ask uh, about the role of British. So, since the British controlled the province of Punjab, they had created a system of law and order, which had which resulted that there was not much violence in Punjab even during the War of Independence, or even after that when there were different movements like Ghadar movement or other militarized movements. The British were able to keep peace in the area to a very large extent. So, was it that British had just decided that they were leaving and abandoning India, that they didn't try to stop such horrific events, or had they had they totally lost the control of the area, which led to so much lawlessness in the area, or were there other reasons for their part?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. I mean, all questions have been extremely good, but this one I like because it helps me put things in perspective, the British role. You see, during the Second World War, the Quit India movement had started. Although Lord Linlithgow had used excessive state terror to crush it, but the British knew the reading on the walls that we can't hold on India forever. This was very clear. Then comes the end of the Second World War. End of the Second World War, the British won the war. We know that. But British economy was uh, uh, in doldrums. Its industry had been smashed by constant German bombing. There was food rationing in Britain. The British didn't exchequer, its treasury was empty. They were under heavy debt to the Americans. The Americans were forcing the British to leave India. Why? Because as long as India and the colonies were part of the European empires, the markets were not open to American products. So they wanted the monopoly of the British to end, and they begin with in India. Okay. So American pressure that we you pay your salaries out, you leave India. That is what forced the British hand to leave. Second, the Second World War had devastated people in the millions, huh? And British armies were stationed still in Europe. Very few were in the subcontinent. Then you have the uprising of the naval ratings, I think February 1946. In Karachi and Mumbai, the Indian Muslim, Hindu, Sikh naval juniors, they attacked their superiors saying that they were being mistreated. So that was another indication. There was an Indian National Army, although I think its role has been greatly exaggerated, but people from the subcontinent arrested by the Japanese had been given a choice either to suffer in Japanese POW camps or join the INA led by Subhash Chandra Bose and fight the British. So that was another indication that things would change. Quit India movement crushed, but there was a big resistance. All that had convinced the British that they can't hold on to India anymore. So when they realized that they can't leave India on their terms, what were the terms they wanted? It was the Cabinet Mission Plan. What is wrong with the Cabinet Mission Plan? Let me tell you this. The Cabinet Mission Plan divided India into three groups, A, B, and C. Group A were Hindu majority provinces, 8, I think. Group B were the northwestern Muslim provinces, Sindh, Punjab, and northwest frontier. Balochistan was still not a province, of which northwest frontier province was pro-Congress, remember, so 2. And Group C was Bengal. So India would have these three groups in which the provinces would be allocated. then the central government or the union government would have only three subjects: defense, foreign affairs, and communications, and no original right to taxation except for these services. All the rest, residuary powers, were given to the provinces. But one thing more. These three groups every 10 years had the right to decide whether they wanted to remain in the union or to withdraw. So this was not a permanent solution. Even more importantly, the 500, 600 princely states, it was declared British paramountcy will not be inherited either by India or Pakistan. So the princely states could remain independent or join India or Pakistan. The Congress position was, how can you rule India without an effective center? And I say this was absolutely the correct position, because Mr. Jinnah, who was opposed to this, when Pakistan came into being, the Pakistan he created was a million times more centralized than whatever India is under its constitution. Why? Anybody who's a student of political science would know that without an effective center, you have no state to run. The monopoly of power, legitimate power, people who have read political theory, political science would know that. And imagine, even if they, so that's what the British wanted. The Muslim League, why did they accept it? That's a different story, and it's a long story. If you organize another sitting, I've shown that Jinnah was threatened that either he accept the cabinet mission plan or they will leave India to the Congress. That's why he accepted, not because he wanted it. He wanted Pakistan. And he's on record saying, even if we join now, our aim is Pakistan. The Congress refused. Okay. So the British plan to leave India was, you leave by one door and you come back through hundreds of doors, as advisors to princely state this, princely states that. Who would stop them? But that was all over, because in the end, the Congress refused that the princely states couldn't be independent. And in Pakistan also, Mr. Jinnah refused. We were the first to walk into Kalat and integrate it. Even when on the 11th of August, the Khan of Kalat had declared Kalat independent and Pakistan had accepted it. But that was only before the transfer of power. After the transfer of power, both states engaged themselves in seeing to it that the princely states within their reach join them. Simple as that. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, I hope he has understood. Well, we have one last question from Shujat, and then we'll conclude accordingly. Yes, Shujat, please.
Thank you once again. So if I remember correctly, in the book it was mentioned that somewhere that the urban society or urban community at that time was more involved in the communal fights, or they were showing signs of religious or nationalism for that matter. But
Yeah.
the rural areas were content with their place, probably because of the traditional values. But I was thinking, were there other reasons like technology or something which was more readily available in urban societies, or I'm not sure if the word was the society was as divided or unequally divided in terms of technology as of today's society. And since more or less it's the last question, so I was wondering, what do you think, will Punjab will lead the way as the most important actor for the future of peaceful relations between India and Pakistan, and if you have any hopes for that?
Thank you very much. Excellent question once again. First of all, this question of technology. Look, when I was growing up on Temple Road and I belonged to a middle class family, we could count the people who had a telephone. Telephones becoming something which every family owns it's as late as the 80s or 90s, and now everybody has a mobile. So Why urban centers are always the center of political activism is because you have thousands of people living together in a very limited space. In the villages are a few thousand, few hundred, a few families. It's decentralized. There are old traditions. People are used to the slow but regular ways. The cities are always pulsating with activism. So it's not so much technology, if you want to insist on it, because I don't think anybody in a village had a telephone that you could call and tell them do what. Even in the city, in Lahore city, very few had a telephone. It was the fact that all the colleges, all the universities, all the political consciousness, good and bad, was being imparted in Lahore. All the colleges were here, university was here. That's where the intelligentsia with ideas, with demands, with the ability to protest resides. As simple as that. Coming to the last question, any solution to India-Pakistan peace is incomplete without the two Punjabs leading the way. Although when I say this, it is more a Pakistani position because we are the dominant group in Pakistan. You look at the bureaucracy, you look at the military, you look even at the industry and so on. All Punjabi owned, very few others. We are 40% if according to one, if you include the Saraiki, then 51%, but let's say 40% are Punjabis. Go over to India. East Punjab today is a little more than 1% of the total Indian population. So East Punjab doesn't have that clout and they can't decide things the way we can. So the onus will always be on the Pakistani Punjab. The Sikhs want to come and visit their holy places. They lost everything. Even this Kartarpur thing, haven't you seen things? So I don't think it's an equal statement. The East Punjab people would like friendly relations, but I don't think they want to become part of a greater Punjab for a simple reason. In East Punjab, the Sikhs are in a majority, I think 57 or 61%. The rest are Hindus, 3-4% Muslims. If they join the whole of Punjab, they become about 12-13%. Why would they want to do that? They are already a majority. So Pakistan and India are there to stay. When I say these things, I break many taboos and I never subscribe to the what is good for the gallery. The onus is on us, on the Pakistani state. The Pakistani state is a Punjabi state. If we want peace with India, I think India would be ready, and East Punjab would be the readiest if that is grammatically correct. But I think I express my feelings. Thank you very much. Anything more I can do for you?
Thank you very, very much. It was indeed an opportunity to have you, to listen to you, to have questions from our students, and I cannot say more. Indeed, it was a good opportunity. Thank you very much, sir.
My pleasure. My thanks to Dr. Yaqub Bangash, to your university, to you, and all your very interesting students. From the questions, I could understand they have understood Lahore very well and they were interested in this lecture. And for anyone who gives a talk, the feeling that the listeners are interested in what you are saying is a great feeling. So thank you very much. And I wish you all the very best.
Thank you, sir.
Bye for now.
Okay, bye.
Yes, very good question.